Hi! Good day, Edu534 people. I am Larislene Espadarizo of Quezon Nueva Ecija. Cristel and I will report the Day 14 in Technology and Teaching and Learning 1, titled Distance Learning, Synchronous and Asynchronous. Our objective for today is at the end of this module, I can distinguish the difference between synchronous and asynchronous distance learning, and I can identify flexible learning through online communication. Before I start, let's have this productivity tip. It's a great day today. I hope you are safe and healthy. Follow this simple reminder to keep your mind refreshed and energized. Drink a lot of water, eat healthy food, and don't forget to browse your notes to help you recall your previous lesson and activate your knowledge. Start this day with a smile. So, let's have distance learning. I know you are all familiar about distance learning because as we are facing this pandemic, we are starting to engage and familiarize what distance learning is. In our school, Pinma Arroyo University, we are having a flex learning, which is blended learning mode, which includes face-to-face session and distance learning. But the face-to-face session will only be conducted when it's safe to do so. So let's define what distance learning is in our module. Distance learning or distance education, e-learning and online learning, form of education in which the same elements include physical separation of teacher and students during instruction and the use of various technology to facilitate student-teacher and student-student communication. The certain terms such as e-learning and online learning are synonymous with distance learning in some contexts. Nevertheless, all forms of distance learning share common traits and the objectives are usually the same. E-learning or online learning is a form of distance learning. So, distance learning, in simple words, it is a method of instruction that allows students to access curriculum without face-to-face contact with an instructor or in a typical classroom setting. Instead, learning happens through an online program that allows self-paced and individualized courses. Let's have another definition through Merriam-Webster or Merriam Dictionary. A method of study where teachers and students do not meet in a classroom but use the internet, email, mail, and etc. to have classes. This definition helps the basic premises of distance learning, which is that educators and those who are learning are not physically present in the same location. It also sets up some of the solutions that are used to enable distance education such as internet, email, and other educational platforms that will help in learning. Distance learning before this pandemic traditionally has focused on non-traditional students such as full-time workers, military personnel, and non-resident or individual in remote region who are unable to attend classroom lectures. So, let's have fourth characteristic of distance learning. Distance learning is definition carried out through institution. It's not self-study or non-academic learning environment. So, first, distance learning is by the definition carried out through institution. It is not self-study or non-academic learning environment. The institution may or may not offer traditional classroom-based instruction as well, but they are eligible for accreditation by the same agencies as those employing traditional methods. Number 2, geographic separation is an inherent in distance learning, and time may also separate students and teachers. Accessibility and convenience are important advantages of this mode of education. Well-designed program can also bridge intellectual, cultural, and social differences between students. Number 3, interactive telecommunication connect individuals within a learning group and with the teacher. Most often, electronic communication, such as email, are used by traditional forms of communication, such as the postal system, may also play a role. Whatever the medium, interaction is essential to distance education, as it is to any education. The connection of learners, teachers, and instructional resources become less dependent on physical proximity as communication systems become more sophisticated and wide available. Consequently, the internet, mobile phones, and email have contributed to the rapid growth in distance learning. Number 4. And finally, distance education. Like any education, establishes a learning group, sometimes called a learning community, which is composed of student, a teacher, and instructional resources. Example is the book, audio, video, and graphic displays that allow the student to access the content of instruction. Social networking on the internet promotes the idea of community building. On sites such as Facebook and YouTube, users construct profile, identify members or the friends with whom they share a connection, and build new communities of like-minded person. In the distance learning setting, such networking enables student connection with each other and thereby reduce their sense of isolation. These 4 characteristics help to separate formal distance learning from practices like people voluntarily learning information in their spare time in constructed way. The reference to saying connected via telecommunication also help to ensure that modern internet-based method and more traditional mail-based method are both included. So that is all for the distance learning and its 4 characteristics. Let's have Miss Crystal Pagaduan to explain what synchronous and asynchronous distance learning is. Thank you very much for listening.
Hi everyone, this is Crystal Joy Baldas Pagaduan from Dingalan, Aurora. To continue our discussion today, we will talking about synchronous and asynchronous distance learning. So what is it all about? Due to the digital era that we live in, we are overwhelmed by new learning technologies. And these learning technologies have one thing in common. They support asynchronous learning. And how does it compare with asynchronous learning? Well, let's start with the explanation of the old-fashioned way. So, synchronous distance learning is a learning event in which a group of participants, such as teacher and students, are engaged in learning by the uses of multimedia in different places at the same time. The classes are conducted real-time. This is a face-to-face interaction through online with the uses of web conferencing like FB Messenger, video chat, and among others. Also, the tasks were given real-time so that the response of the learner can be checked already. Like what we've encountered in our recitation in this subject last quarter, right? In synchronous learning, we are able to use Google Meet, Zoom, Cisco Webex, MS Team, and the most convenient, which is the FB Messenger, where we able to collaborate, interact with our colleagues regarding our lessons. So what are the pros and advantages of synchronous learning? First, the interaction happens real-time within the teacher and the learners. Second, we can exchange of knowledge, experiences between students to teacher or students to students. Third, the real-time feedback from the teacher. Also, it is highly motivating and well convenient for the learners and the teacher. However, there are also disadvantages of synchronous learning. First, it is strictly technology-based. Second, the demand of high-speed internet connection. It is true, right? That this learning requires a good bandwidth. Like for instance, what we've encountered whenever we have an online meeting, relate, the connection get lost because of the weather and also because of our connection na din. The last one, it is challenging for the learners or students with poor social skill. But diba, most of the time, learners excel in this way of learning. Correct me if I'm wrong. So, let's go back in the disadvantage of synchronous learning. It is also requires careful planning and the local time barriers arises. And now, let's proceed to asynchronous distance learning. Asynchronous distance learning is a learning event which happens when the teacher and the learners interact in a different place and during different times. It means that there is no face-to-face interaction online because the tasks and assignments were given by the teacher and the students will finish it through a given schedule. Like for instance, in our English 152. Another example is whenever our teacher given us a performance task like a video presentation task. and it will be passed next week. So that examples are asynchronous distance learning. In this kind of learning, the teacher will be able to use Google Classroom, Seesaw, Edmodo, Schoology, and We for School. Also, the activities are self-regulated and the teacher may use instructional videos, email, texting, or blogs to facilitate the learning of the learners. So what are the pros or advantages of asynchronous distance learning? There was obvious benefits of asynchronous learning. First, the flexibility, which allows the learners to balance family, work, and school in a way that work for schedule. And also, it is beneficial for the learners who cannot meet the traditional classroom or even online. Second, it is anytime and anywhere learning. Third, the opportunities to research the answer. And lastly, we can express our thoughts and without any interruption. However, there are corresponding disadvantages of asynchronous distance learning. First, the lack of feedback and the misunderstanding may be an issue. A second can be cause of lack of motivation. And the third one is the lack of personal interactions. Okay, we're almost done in Module 14. And to sum it up, what we've discussed in this lesson, first, the meaning of distance learning and the distance education or e-learning and online learning. These are the forms of education that include physical separation of the participants, which are teachers and students during the instruction by the use of technologies to facilitate the students and a teacher or students to students communication. And we've already discussed the 4 characteristics of distance learning and the difference between synchronous and asynchronous distance learning. Furthermore, its advantages and disadvantages toward learning. Did you understand it all? Larislyn and I hope so. Thank you for watching and listening. God bless us all.